Hey, this is Seth Parnell, the minister of the Portia Church of Christ, and this is episode 186 of the Midweek Bible Study. Hope that you are doing well. Hope things are going your way. We always appreciate you being here with us tonight. It's been a beautiful Thursday so far. Pretty rainy on the way, at least on the way to work it was. And so we had some rain in the morning, but it turned out to be a pretty nice day in the afternoon. And so hopefully you were able to enjoy some of that and had a good one yourself. It's always good to be here with you on a Thursday night. But as we always do, we want to give you an invitation if you're someone who is in the local area. We meet on Sunday morning, I believe, at when do we meet? We meet at 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, and then 5 o'clock on Sunday night, and then 6 o'clock on Wednesday night. And we are located at 307 South Jackson Street in Portia, Arkansas. And so if you get a chance, come and stop by and see us. And we would love to hear from you, and love to be able to worship with you and be able to study the Word of God together. And I believe, like I said, we're getting into chapter 13 in our class on the book of Acts on Wednesday night. And so if you want to study some of the missionary journeys of Paul, we're fixing to get into some of those and study about them. And then we are studying 1 Corinthians, I believe, in our Sunday morning class. And so if you're interested in any of those, feel free to drop by. We'd love to see you. Also, if you have any suggestions for future episodes, then please feel free to drop those our way. We'd love to hear what you think and hear what you think we should have in the future. And so hopefully we can keep on doing some studies that are beneficial to all who are out there. But appreciate of course everyone who drops by. And I want to give also a special shout out to Jackie Henry. Hope that you are doing well. The first one here. Hope that you are doing good. Always appreciate you being here with us. But as we see here on the title, we're going to be in Judges chapter 4. Judges chapter 4. As we know, we've taken a look at Othniel, we've taken a look at Ehud, we've taken a look at Shamgar, and now we're going to take a look at Deborah and Barak. And usually these two are kind of paired up. They're kind of thought of in tandem because of how they solved this problem that Israel had. But as we see, Deborah was the kind of the administrative leader, and Barak was the military leader. And so together they kind of worked together in order to solve this problem that they had. And what problem did they have? Well, it tells us what happens here in the first couple of verses here in Judges chapter 4. Here in the first section it says, "And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord after Ehud died. And the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. The commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth Hagoyim. And when the people of Israel cried out to the Lord for help, for he had 900 chariots of iron, and he oppressed the people of Israel cruelly for 20 years. And so you can kind of see the progression of this. As we noted in our study of the Judges, we know this pattern of up and down that Israel is going through. They are very faithful to God, and then they go off into disobedience, they get oppressed, and then they cry out to God again. And so when he says here in verse 1, he says the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. This is only the fourth judge, I think, that we're reading about, but yet we've already repeated on this cycle. He says just as they did after Othniel died, just as they did after Shamgar, says that they did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. They chased after idols. They gave themselves to immorality. They were doing things that were evil in the sight of the Lord. And so, as was before, and as what happened before, in order to preserve kind of the spiritual integrity of Israel, it says God sold them into the hand of a man by the name of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. And he was someone who, at this point, Canaan kind of ruled, the area. They were kind of the top dogs, of, the that part of the world. And so they were stronger than Israel. They had more weapons. They had more advanced, military. And so they came to Israel's place, and they, took what they had, and they oppressed them, and they were and they, brought together, their forces to where they took advantage of the situation, that Israel was in. And so this Jabin, who was the king of Canaan, not a very nice fellow. He was someone who, like I said, was cruel and enjoyed the wealth that they had, they had gotten through their oppression of other people. And he had the specific commander that he put in charge of his army, this man by the name of Sisera, and he's the one who's going to be, coming up against Israel. He's going to be the one they're going to have to face off against, and in this coming battle. And so we find this, this ruler who has oppressed, many people. And then, as we've already noted, the people of Israel, they did what's evil in the sight of the Lord. Because of that, the Lord sold them to the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan. And then because of that, in verse 3, the people of Israel cried out to the Lord for help. Or because these were a mighty people. They had 900 chariots of iron, and they were oppressing Israel. But even though all oppression is probably harsh, it's probably cruel, but they make special mention at the end of this verse. It says that he oppressed the people of Israel cruelly for 20 years. That their oppression was cruel, probably meaning that it was more severe, than the times before. Israel's suffering in this case was a more severe case of suffering than it was before, and this lasted for 20 years. 20 years, a lot can change in 20 years, but this is how long Jabin was in charge, and Sisera was in charge, until they cry out to God and cry for deliverance and cry for mercy in this regard, for some people to be free from this cruelty that was being brought upon them. And so the writer of the book of Judges is going to recount how this particular instance of oppression is going to be overturned. But before we go on any longer, we also want to welcome the Dunlaps here. Hope that you are doing good. Hope you're feeling better. Hope everything is going good with you, and we always appreciate you guys stopping by. And also, we got Donna is here as well. Hope that you are doing well. Always good to see you here with us tonight as well. But Deborah she is here, and she is going to be introduced here in verses 4 and following. We're going to introduce to the deliverer, of this particular case, of oppression. Now, in verse 4, it says, "Now Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel at that time. She used to sit under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the people of Israel came to her for judgment." And so, excuse me, we're introduced to kind of the main character of the story. A woman by the name of Deborah. Now, this was, like I said, this was particularly at this time a little bit unusual, and it kind of speaks to the chaotic time this time of the Judges was, that we would find Deborah being someone who was an administrative judge. Do fast forward to the time of the Gospels, when the Pharisees and the Sadducees were in charge. Do you think you would ever find a woman in a position of judgment like this? It's not likely at all. But during the time of the Judges, some people think that she was placed in this position because of her wisdom. Some think that there was there's kind of a vacuum of capable leaders, and so she stepped up in order to serve Israel in the best way that she could. We do know that she was a prophetess, meaning that she spoke the word of God to the people And so she had that connection, with God, as well. And it says that she was judging Israel, at this time. And she had a specific place that she would, sit under a tree, that was in the hill country of Ephraim, and people would come to her, for a judgment, and she would, judge their case and hear, their case. And so this is the main character here in, this story. And in verse 6, we're going to get introduced to the second, main character that's going to play a prominent role. Verse 6, it says, she sent and summoned Barak, the son of Abinoam, from Kadesh Naphtali, and said to him, has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you, go, gather your men at Mount Tabor, and taking 10,000 from the people of Naphtali and the people of Zebulun. And I will draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, to meet you by the river Kishon, with his chariots and his troops. I will give him into your hand. And so Deborah tells, Barak, what God has said and what he has, kind of fulfilling her role as a judge and a prophetess. She is basically informing Barak of what God had said. Now, there is some debate about this. Some think that, she was informing Barak this. Others say that she was reminding Barak of this, that Barak had already been told, about this command and about this, what God had wanted him to do. He just didn't have the courage, to do it. And so, we're not sure, which, but she is either she's informing him or reminding him. She says, has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you, go to Mount Tabor and take 10,000 men there with you. And in verse, like I said, in verse 7, he says, I will draw out Sisera, the general, and to meet you by the river Kishon, with his chariots and his troops, and I will give him into your hand. Now, as we looked at before, up here in verse 3, I believe, it says that Sisera had 900 chariots of iron. And that was a very, very big advantage, especially on the open field, on an open plain. A chariot of iron was a tremendous weapon, on the battlefield. And Israel didn't have any chariots. They probably didn't have many horsemen either. But this was going to be a very uphill battle if they were going to fight by traditional means, because the Canaanites not only had a large army, but a very, very powerful weapons as well. And this is going to be a very, very tough battle for them if they didn't have God, on their side. And so these chariots of iron represent a very significant, obstacle, for them. But as we've already seen in this book, God can overcome anything that seems too big. There's nothing that is too big of an obstacle for God to overcome. And so in verse 8, we have Barak's response to this. And it says, Barak has said to her, if you will go with me, I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go. And she said, I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. Then Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh, and Barak called out Zebulun and Naphtali to Kadesh, and 10,000 men went up at his heels, and Deborah went up with him. And so we see the response, that Barak has to Deborah here in this case. And he basically says, well, I know this, or I understand this, but if you're not going, then I'm not going. If you're going to come with me, then I'll do this. But I'm not doing this alone. I'm not doing this, by myself. It's basically, what he said. And some people think that this is a kind of a act of cowardice, from him. Some say he wasn't courageous enough. He wasn't, he didn't have the wherewithal in order to take on this task and take on this role, of leadership. Some say that he was maybe, testing, Deborah in this case to say, how much are you sure about this prophecy? How much do you believe in this word, that you have? If you'll come with me, if you'll, put your life on the line as well, then I know this is true, and I'm going to go forward, with it. And so, it doesn't seem like Barak was the most courageous of people, and so it might be lean towards the former, but it is definitely, he basically says, I'm not doing this by myself. You're going to have to go, with me. And so we see this, as a big, as a pretty, substantial lesson in the value of encouragement. And I think, this is one of the bigger lessons that we can get, from the story of Deborah, and from, how she interacts, with Barak, and how she plays her role, in the story. The success, of many people, or any great person, oftentimes is supported by a number, of other people along the way. Encouragement can go such, a long way. If you have, someone who has tremendous talent, someone who has great skill in doing something, or someone who is, excuse me, who is very smart, very intelligent, could, deliver a fantastic and a dynamic lesson. If you have, someone like that, but they never decide to teach, or they never decide to use those skills or use those talents, then what good are they? What impact does that make? Well, it makes, nothing. If you're someone who can give, the best lesson in the world, but you never actually give that lesson, then it amounts, to nothing. But if somebody comes along and encourages that person and says, you can do this, you can overcome the obstacles in your way, you can be someone that can succeed in this, even though you might fail, you might have obstacles along the way, you're not going to get it perfect, the first time, but you can do this, and you can be successful at this if you keep at it, and you keep on, keep on doing it. Those people are so valuable, not only to the church, but also to a person's, faith, in general. To have those encouragers out there, to have those people who have your back, in that case. And it's not always, just a like he's just like a yes man, or someone who is just says, good things all the time. Sometimes we have to keep each other accountable. Sometimes we have to offer advice that helps us improve, even though what we might consider constructive criticism or something of that sort. But we always want the other person to succeed. We always want to encourage them to be the best that they can be. And that's what Deborah does here in this case. Barak is not winning this war without her. Not only does he outright say that, but we see that in the story. The war is not getting won without Deborah. And she's not going to don a suit of armor and lead a charge out there and face Sisera by herself. She's not going to do that. But this war is not getting won without her. And so she is, through her encouragement and through her willingness, to be there, for, Barak, he's able to do something that would otherwise be considered, impossible. He's able to be the deliverer, of, Israel. And so this is something that we should always be invested in. We should always be someone who does that, to the best of our ability, to be an encourager, to be someone who goes out of our way to let people know that they can do great things for God. They can do tremendous things for them. They have that ability. They have that talent. They have that skill. And if they just stay the course, they can do some great things. We need more people like that, because usually the hardest, or a lot of times the hardest time in doing anything is the first couple of times that you do it. If it's giving a lesson, I've learned so much over the years, preaching and teaching, I'd like to think that my sermons, today are leaps and bounds better than they were, when I first, started, back in, I think it was 2010, I think, 2009, when I preached my first sermon. That's that's getting to be a ways ago, but it was but I hope that I've improved since then, because when you're just starting out, you basically you don't know anything. You don't know how to all the ins and outs. You don't know really what you're capable of when you first start out something, and so you're going to make mistakes, and you're going to do things that are not optimal. You're going to make blunders, and do all sorts of stuff. But if we have people who, when we do those things, and when we have those failings, when we have people encourage us to keep going, encourages us to kind of stay that course, we can, that makes that person, that solidifies that resolve in that person, and allows them to use their skills and their talents better, and use them in a way that can glorify God. We need people like that, so much, so that when a person fails the first time, they don't just quit, outright. When they make a huge blunder in what they do, they don't say, "I'm not meant for this," or "This is not for me." But rather, instead, they say, "Well, I made this mistake, this time, but next time I'm going to fix that. I'm going to do things different, and I'm going to keep going until I'm better at this." And that can go for anything, whether it be, talking to people about the gospel, whether it be teaching, whether it be leading a song, whether it be, leading a prayer, whether it be, serving in any capacity across, anything. You're not going to be, very good at it probably the first time that you do it. But if we're comfortable with having those failings, and we have people encouraging us to keep going, we know that, that's going to allow us to be victorious in what we do. And so that's what Deborah did here in this case. She was a great, encourager, and motivated, Barak in order to do what he needed to do, and what Israel, needed him to do. And so we find here in verse 11, in getting into verse 11 and verse 12, it kind of sets up what's going to be the ending of the story. It says, "Now Heber the Kenite had separated from the Kenites, the descendants of Hobab, the father-in-law of Moses, and had pitched his tent as far away as the oak in Zananim, which is near Kadesh." And so this is going to be near the battlefield in which this big battle is going to take place. And so in verses 12, in verse 12, it says Sisera hears about this mustering of an army, to get 10,000 people in one place. It takes some effort, it takes some time in order to gather that many people, and to get all the equipment and get all the supplies in one place. You can't do that in secret. And so Sisera hears about this, and so he gets all his men and all his chariots. And every single time, almost every single time, the Bible mentions the army of Jabin or in Sisera, and mentions these chariots. And so we see how important of a role these chariots play here in this. But we find that Sisera, he is made aware of this. And so in verse 14, down here in this passage, it says, "Now Deborah said to Barak, 'Up, for this is the day in which the Lord has given Sisera into your hand. Does not the Lord go out before you?' And so Barak went down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him." And so we see her do this in the first part, and now we're going to see her do this, again here in verse 14, where she basically says, "Get up, up, for this is the day that the Lord has given Sisera into your hand, and the Lord is going out before you." Basically encouraging Barak, saying, get up. It's time to go do this. It's time to deliver Israel, because God is on your side. God goes out before you. And so the day is yours if you go out and take it. Not just once, but twice we find here Deborah building up, Barak in order to gain, this victory. And as we see how much different, would it be if we had more people, like Deborah here, who built people up instead of those who tear others down. A lot of times, sometimes when we see, especially when we see an error in something, or when we see, a mistake in the perspective of someone, or in the in what they say, or in what they teach, a lot of times the first thing we want to do is tear that person down, or if it's someone we don't like, or even someone who is hostile towards Christianity, sometimes we want to tear them down, and do that as a practice. But if we focused on more doing this, and instead of building people up, like I said, equipping them to reach their potential, instead of tearing people down, I think the world would be a little bit different, and I think it would be a little bit better. But Deborah definitely played this role as being a builder, and not someone who tore others down. And so we see that Barak gets his army, his 10,000 men. And in verse 15, we have the result of this conflict. And in verse 15 down through 16, it says, "And the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and all his army before Barak by the edge of the sword. And Sisera got down from his chariot and fled away on foot. And Barak pursued the chariots and the army to Harosheth Hagoyim. And all the army of Sisera fell by the edge of the sword, and not a man was left." And that speaks to the brutality, of ancient warfare, at this time. It says not a man was left. The entire army of Sisera was defeated and killed here in this case. It was a very brutal affair. And if you go to the next chapter in Judges, or not the next chapter, the next chapter in Judges chapter 5, we see how, and what most people are pretty sure what happened here in this case, is that down here by the river, God caused a rainstorm or a flash flood to take place, and the ground got very soggy, very muddy, to the fact where these chariots started spinning their wheels and weren't able to function properly. And so the advantage that these chariots had was eliminated, and Israel was able to conquer over Canaan in this way. And because, as you see here in verse 15, down here in this middle section, it says, "And Sisera got down from his chariot and fled away on foot." Now, what do you think would be faster, running or riding in a chariot with horses pulling you? Horses are faster than people, and so if the chariot was working, if the chariot was functional, then you'd think that he would stay on the chariot. But it says he got down from his chariot and fled away on foot. And so if this chariot was stuck in the mud, then Sisera would have to get down and flee. And so Barak pursued him. And in verses 17 and down through about to the end of the chapter, we have the story of Jael. And Jael was someone who would end up being the one to take, the glory of this battle with what she would do. And she's often built up as kind of a hero in this case. She definitely is an instrument of God here in this case, but she's not exactly a what you might say Girl Scout, either. But Barak is pursued here in verse 17. Sisera, he flees, and then they have the account in which, Jael, kind of convinces him, to that he's in safety, that she'll take care of him, and while he's asleep, she takes a tent peg and she drives it into his temple, and then when Barak shows up, she motions him inside her tent and shows him, the commander of the army that he was facing, and how she had killed him. And so we might, take a more, more deeper look at this part of the story, later on, because in the next chapter we have, kind of the song of Deborah, and so she's going to have this song that talks about the victory, of this. But you see that she lived up to an opportunity that played her way, and she was able to be an instrument of God here in that case. But when you see the case of Sisera, he thought that this was going to be a mighty victory for him. He thought that this was going to be a piece of cake. But all of a sudden, he finds himself, fleeing for his life. And he thinks that he's away because he thinks that he's found a safe place. But in the end, what happens? His life, is ended, in that moment. You think back to the story of the rich man who had abundance of crops, and he said, well, everything is good. I'm going to tear down my barns. I'm going to build bigger barns. I'm going to store all my wealth, and then I'm going to eat, drink, and be merry. But what did God say? He said, this night your soul is going to be required of you, and who are you going to leave this wealth to? That's what kind of happens to Sisera here in this case. He thinks that he's run away. He thinks he's, in safety. But yet, in the end, you cannot run from God. As Jonah can tell you, and as other people can tell you, you cannot run away from God. Eventually, your sin is going to come and find you out. Eventually, it's going to, be something that, its consequences are going to show up if we don't address it, right now. If we don't, take care of it, in the moment, you cannot run away, from, your sin. But as we know, salvation can only be found, through the sacrifice of Jesus and what He can provide for us. And so, one last lesson as we, close down here for tonight, and we'll pick up next Thursday. But focus more on the salvation of your soul. Don't run away. Don't focus on running away from your sin, but be someone who lets Jesus fight those battles for you, and be someone who takes on that sin. Because as we know, Jesus, He conquered sin. He conquered everything that Satan had to throw at him, and He cannot, and that we can be assured that He has that battle won. And so if we let Him take on that fight, we know that we're in a good place. So don't run away from your sin like Sisera did here, but be someone who lets Jesus fight that battle. But I think that's going to be it for us here tonight. We'll be back here next Thursday for another edition of the Midweek Bible Study. Next week is the lectureship down at CRC down at Crowley's Ridge College. And so if you get a chance, I think it's 6 o'clock on Sunday night, and then it's 7 o'clock, I think, on Monday and Tuesday night. And then they have lectures all throughout the day, from Sunday to Wednesday. And so I think it ends on at 11 on Wednesday. And so if you want to hear some good Bible lessons, you head on down to Crowley's Ridge. And next week we might do a review of that lectureship. So we may take a break from our judges and look at a review of that lectureship. But yeah, that's kind of some of the happenings that are going on in the local area. But until next time, we will get out of here. Hope you have a wonderful week ahead of you, and I hope everything goes your way. I'm still hoping it'll warm up a little bit more, but I'm sure that will happen eventually. But until we meet again, hope you can go out and be the light of the world and glorify God in everything that you do. We'll catch you next time.